Hi, and welcome to the webinar. Welcome to State of the IVD Industry 2025. I want to thank you for joining us. This is the largest webinar in terms of attendees that Ion IVD has had, and so we thank you for your support. I will first want to talk about our panelists that are joining us today. These are uncertain times, as I think a lot of us know. There's a lot of things. There could be opportunities, but there's a lot of challenges too, and a lot of just uncertainty. What do you do when there's uncertainty? Find experts, and that's what we've done. So it's fortuitous that we have joining us Bob McGonnagle from Cap Today, Lawrence Worden from IVD Logix, David Freestone from BridgeworX Partners, previously from Cepheid and Q Health and all that. If he's not on it with us now, he should be joining later. And Robert Lacroix from LTC LLC. Myself, I am Bruce Carlson. I'm heading up Ion IVD. What is Ion IVD? Well, at ionivd.com, we have a newsletter, and you can join that for free. I advise you to join if you just want to keep up with IVD markets, some of the things we're talking about here. We'll talk about reports in a second. Previously, I was at Calorama Information. This webinar, technically speaking, is sponsored by Ion IVD. Future webinars, we will entertain sponsors. So talk to us. If there's anything that you see that you'd like to partner with us, talk to us, because we're really open to helping out the IVD industry, working with people, working with consultants and or IVD folks in any way we can. Here's some topics that we're going to talk about today. We're going to try to get to all of them. We also have a chat, so I'm sure people can participate a bit, and that's great. And you see there, like LTA, LTD, FDA rule, the recent mergers and acquisitions, tariffs, some new products, FDA and NIH cuts, and some various things. And how do we look at these? How do we feel about it? How do we generally feel about the industry is all the kinds of things we're going to talk about. Sponsored by Ion IVD today. I wanted to talk very briefly, pay the bills a little. This is one of the things we do. We do market research reports. I've been working on market research reports for 2 decades. Most market research reports, the problem is they're fixed in time. If you're using them for business planning, they're out of date as soon as you publish them. Unclear where the estimates come from. Sometimes they're academic, meaning you're lining up a bunch of numbers on a market board versus doing actual real world estimates based on what companies are doing, based on the trends we're talking about today, and making numbers from that using test pricing and company activities and things. And most of the companies doing market research reports on the internet, they're doing food today, cars tomorrow, IVD, and it's not their expertise. We do something differently on our reports. They're updated throughout the year. This is an innovation that we've come up with that it just doesn't make sense to leave a market research and never provide you with an update. We provide a couple of updates during the year to keep you up to date. They're written by IVD experts, and they're also, if you have a question after you buy a report purchase, as invariably comes up, they're there to support you. One of them, we had a whole webinar on this topic, is the artificial intelligence markets. So that's going to include many features. It will include, say, estimates of what's the market going to be for AI and IVD in various aspects. Like how much is the software? How much is services? So you can figure out where your company stands on that. There's also a detailed investigation of each company, of what that company does, so that you can keep in touch. Here's where the updating comes in, because you have updates 2 times a year. AI and IVD is going to change quite a bit. So you really can't just buy a report and have it sit there and possibly written in a few months ago anyway. You have to keep track of all the companies. So we're making our AI and IVD markets available at ionivd.com. We hope you consider it. There are also other report topics. Do the same thing for sepsis. We do the same thing for liquid biopsy, regular updates and written by experts, IVD.com. Just going to check the chat. We have a chat. Okay, it looks like David Freestone will be joining us. Just got to give him a little instruction here. Okay. And we'll get back to that topic later. I will stop the share and we'll get to our panel. Okay. All right. So we'll just go to the panel right now. The first question, I know there's a temptation, given what just has gone on, to talk about the FDA LTD rule. I'm going to bypass that temptation and just start with, since this is an IVD, State of the IVD webinar, let's talk about new IVD products. You have Beckman DXC 500i, you have Inflamatics Triverity this year, you have QIAstat had some mini GI panels that they released. bioMérieux just had a compact microbiology system, nice little benchtop. And so you could talk about one of those. You could talk about any interesting new product that you've seen on the horizon. And I'll just jump I'll open it up. But I think, Bob, maybe you'll start.
Well, thank you. It is hard. I've got to clear away the champagne corks off my desk so we can address the new products. We are seeing quite a few. It's always interesting to me, most of the new products that are exciting are miniaturized, or they're looking actually for CLIA waiver. That's becoming a very important thing. But more than anything else, I think it's new products meant to fit in to the missing places in the large integrated delivery networks, where you might have quite a compact, miniaturized instrument for a panel at one of the outlying clinics or doctors' groups or a small hospital, while the main flagship hospital has all the big heavy-duty instrumentation, again, all from the same vendor for coherence. So that's what strikes me as I look at it. I'm seeing still a lot of interest in STI detection methods and instrumentation.
Rob, how about you?
Well, I think the newest, the DXCI 500 from Beckman, kind of now you have, that's their product line extension, next gen system on their low, what they would call low lab size, right?
Right.
So now that competes with the Cobas updates and the Siemens update, and you get to the point where in Abbott's Alinity's that 4 of the 5 have kind of gone through and redone their flagship product lines in the last 5 years.
And it could do, it says 800 chemistry tests an hour, and yet it's not taking up a tremendous amount of floor space.
In comparative to what it was before, no. So that's the thing, and that's where the top 5 have kind of, they sit. That's as small as they're going to get with their platforms. Anything smaller will come at you're going to start to see in the next year with the lab in the box stuff.
Right.
And there's a new.
Go ahead.
And we also have a CLIA 5-part diff CBC instrument that was just approved. So that's new to the market. It's always been you can only do, there was one 3-part, now there's a 5. So does that change the dynamic a little bit in doctors' offices?
Let's see. Larry, anything on your radar?
Yeah, it's interesting that all the examples you mentioned, other than the Inflamatics Triverity, are really line extensions, menu fills, greater scalability. It's just kind of more of the same, just filling in the gaps. What to me was really interesting, well, the Triverity is interesting, but I thought Visby getting approval for an at-home STI test, molecular STI test, was kind of groundbreaking. And I'm anxious to see how they plan to commercialize that. And of course, it's going to have to be paid for out of pocket. And they've got a real pricing dilemma. I think the AuraSure home HIV test is around $40. Are they going to charge $40? Will it be adopted at that price? There's a real question, since no test that's not being done in a CLIA lab, home is not a CLIA lab, can be reimbursed. So.
Right.
Great. Oh, David, how about you? First of all, anything on that? Because I know you have some knowledge of the home space. Any thoughts on that and or another interesting product in the IVD market?
Yeah, no, again, kind of ditto to everything that was mentioned. I was going to mention the same as Larry, with some of these new tests now that are actually getting a dual clearance, like the Visby product, where they have an at-home as well as the CLIA waived. Usually there was quite a transition period of going moderately complex, then CLIA waived, and then eventually focusing on the OTC or the more direct to consumer. And now it kind of seems like those, that is all happening simultaneously, which is really changing some of the entry points into the market as miniaturization and ease of use.
That leads to a question for
tests.
me. One might think that's because of all confidence about all those markets, but does it actually, could one say, well, they don't necessarily see home as the ultimate goal where the money's going to be. It's just one of many markets.
Yeah, totally agree. And Larry hit on it. Reimbursement drives adoption flat out. And it's fine to develop tests for the 1% that can afford, or see the need to do an at-home test for $100, but that's not the average healthcare consumer. And I think we're going to have to get to that point where we have a critical mass or a definitive need. COVID kind of got us, there and at least showed proof of concept.
Mhm.
But really, until the reimbursement, aspect is there, and that integration of the result into the healthcare machine, so a diagnosis can be made and a prescription can be given. That at-home market is going to be limited, and I think those delusions of grandeur that everybody had a few years ago have waned, and now it's much more of an equitable spread over healthcare in general.
Sure.
Yeah.
I would just add to that. You shouldn't neglect the pure imitation of something that catches the interest of investors. And so I live in the Chicago area. We see messages for Cologuard and Exact Sciences almost as frequently as we get beer messages at the ball game when it's on. And so people look at that and they think, my gosh, what a market cap we could build from this wonderful marketing.
Yeah, well, they're not well advertised enough, right? I mean, there always was a home OTC market. I mean, you always had cholesterol testing and HIV, but drug testing for maybe that gets outside of a diagnostics purpose.
Well,
but
it's really the tests that really are going to diagnose something like an STI. Those are the ones. Listen, maybe I want to spend $99 do I or do I don't want my doc to know yet. I want to kind of I want to know first, right? But that's how big of a market is that, and that also skews younger, right?
Of course.
That's but home pregnancy test. I mean, that's the big one, right?
That always was. Yeah.
Besides blood glucose, obviously, is the biggest by far.
Blood glucose
those
is
those types of tests. They'll be a niche, but like a general, hey, can I get a home comprehensive metabolic panel? I don't think that's really ever going to be anything. People don't know what it is to begin with.
But what if it was advertised on TV, like Bob's saying? What if you went to the what's by me? If someone went to a Jets game or something and saw an ad for it, that might convince them more. I'm always convinced that the day people know what like Billy Rubin is and what it means, and that'll be the day that they buy more of that stuff. But I do think you're right in the current atmosphere. We don't have not huge demand for these. But it will be better than, say, when I used to do Kalorama reports of the OTC IVD market in 2006 and what that number looked like. You don't want to know compared to what I'm sure it is now.
But there are niches, and as you say, the STIs are one because of confidentiality. Oftentimes, if it's someone in their 20s who's on their parents' healthcare plan, they don't want to go to the doctor and get tested for an STD and have it show up in their parents'
Right.
statements.
Surprise!
Yeah.
And that was the
but,
original
yeah.
behind the HIV.
Yeah, and also with home tests like flu, where there's a connection to care, you have to have, to get a therapeutic within a certain number of hours. And if you're a caregiver, especially with children, you don't want to have to take off work and expose yourself to a waiting room in a pediatrician's office when you could spend that $40 that you're going to pay the doctor for your copay anyway on a test, and then maybe have a direct link to picking up a prescription at the pharmacy. Those can justify out-of-pocket expenses.
Excellent. Well, we have proven that we are IVD metal and that we're not just going to talk about one topic today. But having done that, let's go ahead and talk about, obviously, a federal court has vacated the FDA LTD rule and the regulations that were announced last year around this time, which caused a lot of stress for the laboratory industry. I was always one to maintain that stress would move downward in some ways to the suppliers of laboratories as well. It'll be a jump ball. Anybody that wants it, what do you think? What's the reaction? I don't even know if it's worthy of talking about a potential appeal or if this is the forum. Doesn't seem like FDA has the gumption to appeal, but I guess we never know. What comes next? What do you think?
My initial reaction is certainly everyone owes a debt of gratitude to the AMP and the ACLA in some sense of the word for bringing these suits together, and in particular for whoever chose the judge and the venue. I mean, that person's going to be in high demand, as you might expect. But I was on a call yesterday with some Compass Group leaders, Stan Schofield, who many of you know, and I both were trying to find a single time that the entire lab industry had come together so cohesively to oppose something like this final rule. I mean, you just can't imagine it. And so it's good to clear the ground. I think it clears the ground for the IVD industry now. I mean, the uncertainty that existed in labs as to what their commitments were going to have to be to fulfill the final rule are now somewhat lifted, and the IVD industry can sort of get back to normal. So it's a red letter day, and I hope that it will inspire the lab groups to cooperate as they go after the bigger fish here, which is the payment on the clinical lab fee schedule and on the professional fee schedule, because that is continuing to be a cloud over the industry.
Yeah, hopefully those connections that one makes with the Congress people on the right committees, getting knowledgeable about who they are and how to use grassroots to pressure and things like that. You'll use those muscles in the fight to do something about this PAMA, that sword that's still hanging on everybody's heads. Anybody else? LTD rule?
I just wonder about the wider implications of the ruling, particularly in the definition of what's a medical device and what isn't. And how does that affect FDA's ability to regulate other things that might not quite fit that medical device definition, like software related to devices, et cetera. And as a result, are they going to be forced to appeal in order to maintain their authority in other areas? I think that's an open question.
And there'll likely be other cases. People will now test it. They'll try them, saying, this is software. This is a, if anything, this is a part partly a replication of a doctor's work or what have you. This is advice. This is not a lab result. It'll be interesting, and we can't predict courts here, so that's the tough part. But it will be interesting to see what happens. I know folks will try. Let's see, Rob or David.
Well, I think you look at it part of what Larry got on. Okay, so now I'm going to do a submission, and I have a predicate, and it's an LDT. What does the FDA say now? Well, wait a second. I don't know that we can really vouch for the LDT. That we may need a little bit more information. Like a bigger clinical study to say, how do we know the process is stable that to the device you're referencing? I could easily see the FDA questioning that more than maybe they had in the past. And that could definitely impact new things coming onto the market.
Sure.
Here's a question that we got. Thanks, Chinmay. Is there a need for an IVD now? Can you follow what oncology does and use RUO to LTD as a diagnostic?
And and I think that's probably one of the one of the paths that this can definitely go down, right? What's the old saying, right? Even bad press is good press. Well, we've got a lot of people now that had no idea they couldn't even spell LDT that now know what that is, right? And that can be a good thing for our industry, and give us some more visibility and opportunities to progress. Or it can, it can take a little darker turn where it's like, holy crap, these guys have been getting away with a lot of things. We need to, learn more and understand this pathway and this whole regulatory process even better. And so, I think that's kind of where we are as an industry are kind of on the precipice here of, something that can be great. We just got to make sure we just don't mess it up. And I think that last question was a really good one of perhaps,
one would,
we can get more definitive about some of these processes moving forward.
Yeah, one would like to live in a world where everyone sort of behaves and stays in their lanes. Like this was just one court decision. Maybe the FDA, as I did believe, it went a little far and had been going a little far, even pushing it. Everyone just do the normal thing. The court won't get excessive. They'll just push back, but we can't, of course, predict that because courts can do. They can make whatever determination.
I think a great example is look with COVID, all the emergency EUAs, right? They just got pretty much, if you had one, we did had a clinical sample of 5.
Yeah.
And it got a quick EUA, and then look how much the FDA clawed back because it found out that some of these tests weren't good, right?
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a dry run if you lift, you say, okay, FDA, get out of the way. We know we can police ourselves.
I mean, another thing to think about from a market perspective, where I have been principally, and I used to do a LTD report, is that there's some cut that's dodged here. There's some cut in revenues that's dodged here. We don't know what it is. I've tried in different reports to have analysts look at it. I think it's big in that there could have been we know that labs were going to be hesitant to do the test now, a good chunk of them. Maybe the large centers would keep doing it. We know that labs buy IVD, RUO reagents and other reagents in order to perform these tests. We know that certain IVD companies get revenue from that. We just don't know how much they were going to lose. So there's some amount of dollars to the IVD industry that would have been just frankly subtracted. And then instrument sales that wouldn't have happened. And then advanced things like mass spec, or we might talk about genomics later. Well, that's going to be LTD. So I think there's this whole, for IVD industry, this part of it was dodged. But the second part, and Chime has a follow-up, which is just kind of similar to the first question, but it's a good point. If I were a startup, I would reevaluate my business model and start my revenue stream early rather than wait for an IVD approval. And, it just really depends on whether something else takes the place, right, of this. It's not the FDA that's going to step in, but will will the FDA find other ways to regulate? Will CMS get more involved in this? What do we think there? What's the reason why? And why don't you just start with LTD?
I think you're going to see more of that. At the same time, the labor constraints on all hands in the IVD industry itself, as we know that the manpower is not what it was 5 years ago before COVID, and it's not there in the laboratories, and we know it's not in the FDA either. So I think you will see a limited surge in some LDTs with very bold laboratories and some entrepreneurs creating labs on some single LDT type tests. But I think I don't expect the FDA to make great appeals. They'll want to wait for the politics to improve. Most of the people at FDA who had pushed for this are gone, long gone, and we've heard the cuts. 20,000 people from HHS. Those folks are irreplaceable, at least for now. We're going to be in. If you want to regulate, you won't be able to. Let's put it this way.
Right. Presumably, it looked like it was headed that way. Like you could divine the political will, except that, of course, if the rule stood, the labs would still have to do their part of the compliance.
Of course.
And they might leave it to something like that. Well, we like the fact that labs are giving us all of this self-compliance. And even though we'll never get around to who knows, there. But yeah, let's introduce that into the conversation since it came up. In addition to if there's more LTD discussion, bring up the FDA staff cuts, HHS cuts. What do we think in terms of in vitro diagnostics? We kind of know farmers are not happy. How about our little industry?
It really shouldn't be very happy. Remember, everyone needs an alpha site and a beta site, and they need pretty intelligent folks in large pathology departments to be early investigators, to bring a lot of even intellectual property to bear to develop IVD products. So I think the cupboard's going to be a little bare for now, and the IVD industry is going to be, of course, terribly worried about the tariffs. We're going to have to worry about the supply chain all over again. Once we thought that it was getting fixed, but I think that's now a big question mark for us in the States.
Yeah, bring up to talk about any of those topics. Tariffs. IVD is an international industry. Every time I've looked at a study, there's more non-US than US. That's not true of every industry, and it's actually always the top companies in the industry, be it your Abbott, your Roche, Danaher, and the others, have always had an international focus. It's always been a lot of times, our instruments are subject to such price constraints. Our tests are subject to such price constraints that competition is just tough for contracts in U.S. labs.
Sure.
I might gain an instrument here, lose one there. My only chance is to go to Brazil, and that's been 20, 25 years of that.
Well, you think about it. All right, so let's talk about that. There's no Chinese real IVD in the U.S. There's no, Mindray isn't really here.
Right, yeah.
They're not. Those systems aren't being imported into the U.S. as it is. It's where the risk is here is you've got multinationals that manufacture all over, in different areas. Siemens manufactures here, manufactures in Europe, so they've got risk both ways. Abbott, their instruments in the core lab are actually built in Singapore, so they're all imported. So Abbott, even though they're U.S., has some risk, right? But where they all have risk is in the components. Because you've got, it's electronic. Some of it's coming from, a good portion of it's coming from China.
Of course.
And a lot of this, where it really hits, is not the OEM, but it hits the contract manufacturers to the OEMs.
Exactly.
Making it. And a lot of these contract manufacturers are small. So one OEM may be a significant portion of their revenue, and all of a sudden they're getting nailed with a 25% hit on there. Do they have it built in the contract? If there's a tariff, they can raise price, and if they do, how long does that tariff have to be in place before it does? This back and forth, we have a tariff this week and not next week. It just wreaks havoc. So I'm really interested to hear what coming out of these Q1 reports from the CFOs
I think
and all these OEMs.
Forbes had an interesting article recently, and they stated across healthcare in general, that 69% of all the healthcare products used in the U.S. are manufactured entirely outside of the country. And on further to characterize those more as things like surgical drapes, blood pressure cuffs, pipettes, you name it, kind of the everyday consumables used to deliver healthcare and frankly to perform testing in a clinical laboratory. So you think back to the PPE shortages in COVID, we're either likely to have, supplies that are not affordable or not available as a result of the tariffs.
Yeah, and if say you can't, say a company A can't supply something, every lab has it built in the contract. If you can't supply, we can alternate source. But to go through the process of doing that and qualification, that just doesn't. It's not, you don't just turn the spigot on. That takes time. So it really can impact the industry.
It does.
Yeah, so those are two that the tariffs are going to be interesting. I think one of the things Robbie said earlier was the Q1s will be interesting, and I tend to agree. We'll be reviewing those and probably see people commenting on what companies say about Q1 if there's any late March impact on things, or if they express their fears or intentions over these tariffs rules. But many of these companies are too already based out of the U.S. to change much in this year anyway. So let's talk, and you can talk more about tariffs, of course. I also want to touch on, so it's not just the staff cuts at FDA and HHS, but also, well, let's see, you have staff cuts at CDC, where, okay, that's not maybe a huge amount of sales of IVD products, but it's some kind of a leader in testing and direction of testing that's needed by the industry. You have USAID, which had run certain programs that involving in vitro diagnostics. You have NIH funding cuts, it looks like, or at least just slashing or canceling of grants. Yeah.
For testing, VA staff cuts.
Absolutely. Yes.
Too,
and we're already seeing the result of the NIH funding freeze. Several startups that we work with have had to freeze projects, stop projects, because they don't know that they're going to get the funds.
That's right. And in the academic medical centers and other places, the overhead that is being eliminated is putting important research scientists out of a job. I mean, they will not be able to carry on. I mean, so we're hearing, research that's been conducted for 20, 30, 40 years is now in jeopardy of being lost, just quite literally lost. So as much as we're celebrating the LDT decision, there is plenty to worry about here. There's no question about it in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, you have one potential damage, maybe opportunity for a few IVD companies, potentially damaging rule skipped. Labs will be performing LDTs and trying out mass spectrometry and all sorts of neat instruments, and you'll even have now that this has been eliminated, you might have new labs conducting LDTs that hadn't before. Regulations removed but that on the other hand, you have these cuts. We also have, I mean, if nothing else had changed, 2025 should have been a heck of a year. The Q4s were fairly good. There was some really good. bioMérieux had quite a year last year. All the infectious disease companies, quite a year. Demos are obviously, there's no shortage in positive demos for IVD, but how do you balance that, which should keep us growing, with these uncertainties? What do you think someone at Roche, Kaigen, or bioMérieux, or Beckman Cepheid, is going to say that their strategy will be.
Well, I just want to clarify just a little bit there.
Mhm.
I mean, we are still seeing a substantial contraction in the IVD market, whether it is the Roches, the Cepheids, the Siemens of the world. Everyone has undergone a
Mhm.
substantial reduction in force and realignment and reorganization in the last 12 months. I mean, that our industry has been very, very, substantially hit from that perspective. Now you've got this market contraction, from federal government funding and that with potential regulatory pressures, with the fact that we've issued, we're at a 40-year low for applications for CLIA licenses to new labs. They're closing down every day. I mean, to not think that our market is under tremendous flux right now and uncertainty it's a little rainbows and skittles for everybody to really be looking at. I mean, it's a scary, I think it's a scary time, and I don't think, as an industry, we definitely shouldn't have rose-colored glasses on, because I think there's a lot of very difficult decisions and that being made. At the same time, we've got phenomenal new technology and miniaturization and ease of use and all these great things happening, but those are being driven by market conditions more
Right.
than anything. You got fewer people running more tests
Right.
and getting paid less to do it, and that's a scary, kind of a scary perfect storm of market conditions.
I agree with that, and I think you all would know much more about this than I am, but I get the feeling that the equity markets and private equity is no longer in love with diagnostics, if they ever were. And I'm hearing that it's become kind of a dirty word in many of those circles. And in other words, they've seen too many people pour too much money in without decent return. I'd be interested to hear your comment on that, Dave.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think you're spot on. I mean, a lot of the companies that that we're working with are just that, getting from like that seed funding to a round, or from an A round to a B round. The well hasn't dried up, but there's just a lot more focus and criteria being placed on the opportunity for success. It's not anymore, well, I've got this awesome widget. Well, okay, that technology is fantastic, but what need does it fill? What does the potential market look like? How does it
Who's
replace
going to buy it?
5 other ones? Who's going to buy it? Right. And then how are they going to get reimbursed for it? I mean, there's just a lot more focus on the commercialization aspect of it than just the technology like it has been in the past.
Exactly.
I mean, awesome new widget is also, I mean, the way that this industry tends to handle that is it'll be acquired by one of the large companies soon. If
There's
it
no
really
question
is.
about it.
Yeah, and that's their growth model, right? You make or the big ones.
Oh, absolutely. I think that rather than because to Bob's point, if it was the investors driving all the new products in this market, or the equity, we'd be in trouble. It's very often the hope that they'll be acquired by one of the large ones. Here's a comment from Joan. I'll just use first names here. Joan, thank you. Large companies may be cheering less competition from startups and lower valuation to purchase smaller companies. They will still have the regulatory horsepower to get new devices through the FDA once the dust settles from current FDA staff reductions. Agree with that?
That's historically how it's gone.
Yes.
I think it'd be interesting to see
I mean,
happens.
the trouble is dust settling's doing a lot of work.
Yeah, that's the uncertainty. I made a bold prediction in November, and it looked good, and then all this stuff's coming, and I'm like,
When will that
lab
approval?
device companies submitted, and then FDA's cutting.
You and bold. Remind people of that, because I would love to think everyone attends all of these. We have 54 people live now and 100 signed up. More will watch it, but it was about Lab in a Box. Lab in a Box in 2 years. Well,
Yeah, ADLM next
okay.
year is I'm on the hook for still, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay.
I'm sticking to it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I have another comment here from David, and it's kind of along the lines of what we talked about earlier with LTDs. But so, given the vacating the final rule and the possibility that FDA clearances on new IVD products will be slowed down, doesn't that mean that clinical labs can develop and validate LTDs at least to CLUB standards, and they'll be in a better position now as they will be able to capture the higher gross margins that LTDs offer? I guess my reaction before I throw it out to the group is I don't think, I mean, maybe things work out this way, but I certainly don't believe that this is the intended plan, right? That these cuts are supposed to slow down IVD progress. But anyway, what does the group think about that? If that was understood, if you want me to read again, I will.
I think you have to look at the LDTs in two ways. One of the LDTs that are done to short circuit the FDA clearance process, that you establish your CLIA lab, you get to market and begin to generate revenue. The other LDTs are the ones that are actually created in the lab to meet an unmet need. And that is something that has, in the past decade, been on a constant decline. And as Bob mentioned, it's resource limited. These labs don't have the expertise or the staff to do the validation required for LDTs. And so, we talked to labs 5 years ago. We talked to them today. 5 years ago, they were doing multiple LDTs, very proud of their ability to do it and cost justify it, maybe get a superior product that they felt was on the market. Now they're not doing any. They just don't have resources to do it. So I don't think that there's going to be a large uptake and increase in LDTs in these labs. There may be an increase in companies reaching market faster through an LDT CLIA lab, but not in the regular labs.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly there with Larry. The other things, laboratory personnel they're unique people. And in let's say 2 years that they've had to worry about LDTs and going with a fine tooth comb over the final rule, as all of them have, willingly or not, they had to prepare themselves. I think it's going to lead to a more stringent evaluation of what will be offered as an LDT and what it would not be worth the effort. And laboratories, of course, have such long memories. They'll worry, what if this comes back in 3 years and we're gigged again with something like this? So I think I think the future is not going to be in a huge flowering of LDTs outside of the places where they absolutely are musts and have always been that way, in part because there's no commercial margin in developing FDA approved products there.
Right. And if you're looking at NIH funding to help pay for the LDT, is that going to materialize?
Right.
What can you think of there? So that plays into it. Because I mean, if somebody had an extra couple million floating around, you buy the mass specs and the sequencers, and you hire a bunch of people, because there's going to be people looking for work, and you go to town, right?
Yeah.
And if someone could do that, they could, conceivably grab market. But I wonder how many labs that have that spare cash floating around in the spare space.
Oh yeah, I wonder how much of this already happened. How many people held back a bit just because of the rule, or didn't, like Bob, you were saying, and which I agree with. The lab was serious about LTDs. They really had to start already. It went way too far. But did some already stop with the intention of not doing them anymore? I mean, AACC said 48%, something like that, of labs would just stop doing it if they had to follow those. I want to throw that out and see what you think. And then the other thing is, this is from Joe, and again, from what we hear, government funding grants will continue, but obviously some hangups, which will hopefully be short term. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said there. A lot of what we're discussing is political, Washington, D.C. policy. And there is some thought that, hey, maybe it's just short term, showing there's some policy goals here, and once achieved, things will change. Or the pushback and the industry showed with LTD, for instance, and that they're upset. The pharma industry is already mobilizing in reaction to some of the FDA cuts, that maybe it's short term too. So all of that soup of a question, anything you want to address is fine. Anybody?
to try to predict the political outcomes with it over the next 2 years, I think is mission impossible. I mean, I've never seen anything that zigs and zags quite like this.
The
But
industry will probably have to do more lobbying than it's used to.
it may. On the other hand, though, remember the rest of the world is not the refuge that it used to be 5 years ago. I mean, we have the situation in China that we've spoken about many times, and you all know about. Western Europe, if they're going to have to hugely increase their defense spending, is not going to be lavishing more money on their healthcare systems, which they're already unhappy about. And the same might be true, I think, in many Asian countries that are well developed, like Japan. So North America is going to be increasingly important in a certain sense of the word for the IVD manufacturers.
Do you think any more M&As? We just had Nova Biomedical. So
Yeah.
does anybody want to comment on that? And then any more M&As coming because of what we're talking about? Does this create pressure for more M&A?
Well, it would be very interesting just to speculate on Nova Biomedical if there ever was a dyed-in-the-wool original IVD company, as we've all known it and loved it through most of our careers. I'm sure you'll agree, Larry. It was Nova Biomedical. I mean, we had individuals there who stayed the course. They didn't follow the trends. And then they have sold now for 2.2 billion. They're very smart people. I mean, are they going out at the top? Is it a question of age? Is it a question of an offer they couldn't refuse? I don't really know, but it's a milestone in the development of the IVD industry, as far as I'm concerned.
It's an interesting acquisition, right? Because one of the, Abbott didn't buy them.
Exactly.
Right? They have iStat, but that's the one area Abbott doesn't have, and they could have easily gotten share, and Abbott didn't do it. Advance bought them. And now Advance is a tier 2 IVD company, right?
Out of the blue.
Based on the portfolio. And there's synergy there, right? The instruments, specialty, small specialty instruments in the lab, there's that, and it's a safe segment.
Yes.
Right? It's a very safe segment. So that was interesting. I think it opens Advance to do a little bit more acquisition.
It certainly should.
Not in that kind of, maybe not as much as 2.2, but they could get into different areas that the bigger OEMs just are saying, okay. And then what's going to happen now with BD?
Yes,
right?
They're splitting off, yes.
Yeah, that's splitting off. So what happens there? Do they split off and then make an aggressive push at something? I think that's a definite possibility.
Anybody else on the panel about BD and also Nova?
So.
Yeah, BD is just a big uncertainty. They don't know. They've just decided to split.
Yeah. They're focusing though on, well, you can see some logic in it. Focus on the accutainers and and things we're good at it. It is interesting to what you say, Rob. My question would be, we will never know if someone tried, right, to buy Nova, and maybe the amount's pretty high-ish, right? About, looks like 4 or 5 times revenues. We don't know their revenues; they're private, but
is that 5-time threshold going to still hold for acquisitions moving forward? When you talk about what happens to the market if it depresses, which makes it an opportunity for a big IVD. If it drops down to say 3 times. Then obviously I think you'll see more potential for acquisition of the big ones because it becomes a more attractive price point.
Interesting, yeah.
Well, and does it bring a different focus to what's driving the acquisition? Is it no longer technology, or is it profitability, or a companion market that they need to expand into to have greater pull through to their existing products? When you look at like the BD split and the Nova purchase net, I mean, it's almost like it kind of defies traditional drivers for the merger or the acquisition, or a spinoff, and so maybe again it's this whole culmination of other market factors are gonna create like a whole new driver behind mergers, acquisitions, or or technology commercialization. We are starting to see, a bit of that in talking to some of the VC world and also some of these incubator groups of really, what you think would traditionally kickstart something or drive something. That's not really it. It's hey, we need something in this profit margin that plays in this market because we've got these four other bolt-ons that we think that could really provide more growth. And so I think maybe there's going to be a bit of a different approach to it as we move forward that can change some of those things like multipliers or what would traditionally be a driver for it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that so for instance, to Rob's point a bit, like so a lot of the talk in the past would be, oh, we're going to end up with 5 big IVD companies. Everything's consolidating, which is, there is consolidation, no doubt about it. But there is this other trend where you take like a company like Bruker, which keeps buying up companies that are at least diagnostics diagonal, and if not directly diagnostics, have some use, say nanostring. So there's also maybe some life science companies that are looking to get in because life science isn't always great revenues, isn't always great growth. So you go clinical. They've seen kind of what Bruker has done and others. Yeah, there could be some other interesting trends that lead to us still having a good share of middle companies in IVD doing fairly well, and the buyers deciding not yet to buy them.
Yeah, so you have that. You also have from the startup standpoint, what do you do? And do you look at more than just getting paid for the test result in that owning the data? And that's another revenue stream potential. I mean, any of my clients, it's like, what are you doing that's AI focused that you can tie into, what you're going to do with the result of, past the device, because that gives you something that differentiates you from what's out there. And then if you get people buying it direct or going through doctors' offices paying cash, you have more control.
Yeah.
Related perhaps to that, here's a question. I am curious, what does the panel think about controllable drivers versus non-controllable drivers? Policy changes with every administration. Although we got a big one with this one, but policy changes with every administration, which is true. I mean,
right.
we could be having this discussion at 2008 and looking at the healthcare system potentially changing and having the same type of discussions over, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? What advice would you give to someone looking to bring a new company and new products to market? And I know that the answer to Q&A questions on webinars is often like, hey, we already said this, but feel free to give that advice, panel, and it's okay if you repeat something you said.
Well, let me just pick up on a comment about data and AI. A lot of there's more enthusiasm than profits so far, and certainly in terms of the equity that's been dissipated in a lot of the early efforts that we all know, because some of those companies have blown up. Nevertheless, the appetite and the promise of AI in both clinical and surgical pathology remains sky high, and the driving interest must always be making the real live men and women in the laboratory more efficient. And can we unload some of these tasks to AI and machine learning? I mean, that's going to be a holy grail, we all think.
Yeah. So the workflow AI is definitely got with the drivers of the marketplace. I mean, when I got in 20 years ago, they were talking about, hey, we're getting long in the tooth on the technicians in the lab.
Right.
So and it's only gotten worse.
Yes, exactly.
Definitely. So you've got that, but you also can look at the population dynamics. We're getting older as a country. People have not just one chronic condition, multiple chronic conditions. I get on my comorbidity soapbox quite a bit.
Oh, yes.
Those are areas, if you can start to address that with your solution or your product or your service, you're going to have a marketplace.
Yes. There's no doubt.
So yeah, I mean, I think that it's demos should be driving growth in our market. We should get from population alone, the IVD market should grow at 2%, but it doesn't always, it does, and it will, but it doesn't always just do that because there's all these other negative factors that always get introduced. Like, well, we don't choose to want to pay for these tests.
Yeah.
Or you get things like, to reference the policy of 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. If you look at if we were having this discussion in 2009, 2010, it would be, well, we're going to provide more preventative tests, but we're also going to put a tax on your devices. So that's cool. So yeah,
that's little goody. Shh, don't mention that. We don't give politicians any ideas.
Right.
Is there a particular disease that you'd say, like, let's say the person I was asking about starting a new company, any particular disease area to jump in?
Well, we've been waiting for the decade of the brain for 30 years now, but it's certainly true that there's an enormous amount of interest in the neurological diseases and the appropriate tests for them.
That's where the growth has been on the menus.
Yes,
neurological assays, definitely.
Absolutely, there's no question about that. And
so I would also say liver disease, because undiagnosed liver disease is actually greater than undiagnosed prediabetes.
Yes.
But there's a name for prediabetes. There's no pre-liver disease name.
Right.
So it's there, and that's going to be a big one, and that plays a part with it really has scale on factor for impacts to cardiovascular and diabetes.
Yes, right.
I thought liver disease had a name. It was called spring break. I thought that.
Hey, let's go. We have just a short amount of time. We just got 5 more minutes, but can we do this in 5 minutes? But Roche introduced its sequencing product this year, and wow, did it get quite a bit of reaction. And in conjunction with that, not just talking about Roche, you hear sometimes, well, genomics is now entering IVD. This is the era. This is the era. Counter to that, bioMérieux's call earlier, they were saying, oh, that could happen in 5 years, but molecular diagnostics are really the more realistic. Any thoughts on all of that? Thoughts on Roche's SPX and/or genomics and IVD?
Well, I think, right now, genomics remains highly, highly centralized, and access to genomic testing is limited. There are barriers to access. But, there are, by our estimates, about 330 or so labs in the US doing clinical genomic testing. And that's a small piece of the lab industry, and they're kind of bimodal into very, very high volume and very, very low volume.
Exactly.
So there's no middle ground. And there's no, right now, what's holding genomics in clinical diagnostics back is the fact that it can't be decentralized, economically and practically decentralized. So until the technology from sample to answer gets there at a reasonable price, it's going to remain very centralized. And interestingly, the new platform from Roche is focused on very high volumes as well, although they claim that it can be scalable to very low as well, but they're focusing on high volume right now.
Right.
But I think it's going to get there, and it's going to get there beyond oncology and NIPT. Cardiovascular is probably going to be the next frontier, and then maybe inherited neurological disorders. But I think there's great potential.
Great.
It's very clear to me that sequencing seems to be very, very brilliant and intelligently thought out, from what people tell me who are decent at evaluating these things. And in terms of high volume, it plays into our laboratory consolidation theme. So, I mean, we've got Quest and LabCorp and Sonic. We've got Path Group. And then we've got all the academic medical centers that hold down an entire state. So you take IU, you take UAB, Yeah, I could go on and on and on. Those will, wherever they locate that, will be a high volume site. They will have worked out the logistics, the informatics, and they'll get the specimens to the lab as they get all specimens to those factory type labs that they have at their core. So I think the future is very bright. When and how soon is a question mark. But they're on the right track. They know that this is a big part of the future.
They know that they can't avoid it, right? Roche has to be in all of these places that are,
right.
I mean, they could skip a couple narrow specialties, but they have to be in it. So they had to make a big move, and arguably they did it. I don't know. It comes at a time where Lumina's figuring some things out too. So
right.
that was fortuitous perhaps for Roche.
Right, and Roche is kind of you would almost want to say they've got to commercialize it, but Roche is back right in the space.
Yes, that's a very good point. And no one should ever forget that Roche's interest in diagnostics is very closely aligned with their drugs business.
Yes.
More so than anybody else. And you can see that in personnel moves, and you can see that where they're investing in technologies, all of which should benefit that business enormously down the road.
Well, this is great. I would love to talk more. This panel, we could talk for 2 hours. And unbelievably, nearly 50 people have stayed with us the whole time. But it is probably depending on their time zone, a lunch break for people. So we should probably end our time here talking. I want to thank Bob and Lawrence and Robert and David and everyone. Recordings will be available. We'll email you. Go to ionivd.com if you want to review this webinar. If you have a need for business planning tools, talk to us. If you're looking to sponsor a webinar in the future, go ahead, talk to us or partner in some other way. Go ahead. We are friendly people to talk to at IonIVD. A group of us will be at Dark Daily down in New Orleans. If you haven't joined the Executive War College, I'm happy to put in a plug, and I think IVD people should be down there. Some of us are going to be doing a panel there as well. With that, I will thanks everyone for attending, and with that, we'll close out. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.